First group, the simple cognitive or presentative faculties. They are so called because they give us knowledge in its simplest form, that is, as will be explained, in the singular and in the concrete, and because the objects are now present and presented. Other faculties are also cognitive, but they proceed on the knowledge acquired by these primary powers, and they form composite, abstract, and general notions. The other faculties also look at objects, but these, as in memory, for instance, are not present. They have been in the mind before, and are not presented, but represented. Let us try to discover what must be the first exercise of the conscious mind. It must, I apprehend, be knowledge. Knowledge, the first mental exercise. By this is not meant scientific, that is, arranged knowledge, but knowledge of an object as it presents itself single and with its qualities. We may suppose that it is a knowledge of our bodily frame, say of the tongue or nostrils, or foot or finger, not that we as yet know that it is the tongue or toe, or a member of our complex bodily frame, which in its entirety may as yet be unknown. Yet it may be knowledge, forming the basis of all higher knowledge, abstract and general. 1. Our knowledge must begin with things apprehended as singular. Out of the single things we form general notions by observing points of resemblance. As having seen a number of flowers of a particular type, we form the class rose. This knowledge is also concrete, that is, of things with qualities. This rose is known as having a certain form and color. Out of the concrete, we form abstract notions, such as redness. 2. If the mind did not begin with knowledge, it could never reach it by any process of thought. How can we reason but from what we know? And if we have not knowledge in the premises, we are not entitled to put it into the conclusion. David Hume started with impressions, as of colors, and ideas, mere reproductions of these, such as remembered colors, and thus introduced the most formidable skepticism ever propounded. We meet the skepticism at its entrance by holding that our first conscious experience does not consist of impressions, but is a knowledge of things. This generic group comprises two special powers. 1. Self-perception, or knowledge by the senses. 2. Self-consciousness, or a knowledge of self in its present state. Chapter 1. Sense Perception, Section 1. Its nature. Original, intuitive, positive. By this power, we get a knowledge of things affecting us, external to ourselves and extended. The things thus known we designate matter or body, corresponding to which we have convenient adjectives, material and bodily. In perception, the mind takes cognizance of something external to the perceiving mind. The ego comes, as metaphysicians say, to know the non-ego, or, as I prefer saying, the self knows the not-self. It is not a sensation merely that is given us, or a feeling. It is not an idea or an apprehension, or a notion or a conception, nor is it a belief or faith. It is more than a sensation or a feeling, which may accompany the perception. The experiences denoted by the other phrases come afterwards and imply a previous knowledge. It is not the exact or full truth to say that I feel an external object, or that I have an idea of it, which I may have when it is not present, or that I apprehend it, or have a notion of it, or believe in it. The correct expression is that I have a knowledge of it, or that I cognize it, a phrase which gives us a corresponding adjective and noun, cognitive and cognition. It has to be added that the object is known as affecting us. The primary knowledge is thus both objective and subjective, that is, of an object, but this as perceived by the subjective mind. The two are together in the act of cognition, but they are after all separate, and are separated by every intelligent mind which does not mistake the not-self for the self, and never confounds the perception with the object perceived. The confounding of them is the work of bad reflective or metaphysical philosophy, and not of spontaneous thought. Let us determine some points as to our knowledge by the senses. 1. We have sense perceptions which are original and not derived. Were they not given us by an original endowment, they could never be obtained by experience, by inference, or any other process. Experience, properly speaking, is only a repetition and collection of what we have passed through, and if there be not knowledge in the original experiences, it cannot be had by accumulating them. As little can it be had by reasoning, except from premises which contain knowledge of material objects. Without this, there would be an evident illicit process. That is, we have more in the conclusion than we have in the premises. 2. Sense perception is intuitive. That is, we look directly on a material object. I do not inquire at present what is the precise object perceived, whether it be in the bodily frame or beyond it, how far in, if it be in the bodily frame, how far out, if it be beyond it. Explanations will require to be given and distinctions drawn before we can determine what is the precise object. But whether in the body or without the body, there is an object perceived directly as extended and affecting us. This is the simplest hypothesis, and is accompanied with no difficulties. Every other supposition lands us in inextricable perplexities. It is certain, our consciousness so testifying, that we do know material objects, but nothing coming between us and the object could impart the cognition. 3. Sense perception is positive, and not merely phenomenal or relative. That is, it is of things as they appear, and not of appearances without things, of things known, and not of the relations of things themselves unknown. This proposition is laid down in opposition to two views commonly entertained in the present day. The one is the phenomenal theory of knowledge, which holds that all we can know originally are appearances, and that we cannot know what things are except by some further process, or that we cannot know whether there are things or no. We meet this unsatisfactory doctrine by maintaining that we cannot know appearances except as the appearances of a thing appearing. We do not know all about this thing. We may not know much about it, but we are sure that it exists when it appears to us, and that it is known to us under a certain aspect or as doing something. Even an echo, coming from a hollow in which nothing is seen, has a reality in vibrations of the air reaching the tympanum of our ear. Closely allied to this theory is that of relativity, according to which we do not know things, but merely the relation of one thing to another, to ourselves, or to some other things. Now this is to reverse the proper order of nature. We must so far know things before we can discover their relations. In the discovery of relations, we so far know the things. We know them as having the qualities which bring them into relation. These positions are laid down in opposition to three theories which have been widely entertained, and which it may be useful to look at and examine. Section 2. Theories of sense perception: ideal, inferential, phenomenal, and relative, natural realism. The ideal theory. According to it, the mind does not perceive the material object, but some idea or representation of it, some medium or tertium quid coming between the object and the perceiving mind. This explains nothing and brings in perplexities in addition to those which belong to the subject itself. It was introduced to solve the difficulties supposed to arise from matter being thought to act on mind and mind on matter. The principle was laid down as early as the days of Empedocles, that like could act only on like. So it was necessary to bring in something to interpose between the object perceived and the perceiving mind. According to Democritus, the expounder of the atomic theory of matter, images, blank, composed of the finest atoms floated from the object to the mind. Lucretius has expressed the theory in De Rerum Natura, Libre 4, 48-53. Dico igitur rerum effigius tenuisque figuras, metir ab rebus sumo de corpor rerum, quae quasi membrane vel cortex nominitandast, quod speciem ac formam similum gerit ejus imagio, cucuscumque cluit de corpore fusa vagari. It has appeared in one form or other ever since. It takes a grosser and a more refined shape. Some look on the idea perceived as a sort of material figure, like the image in a mirror, or that formed on the retina of the eye when an object is before it. This removes no difficulty, for if this be a material figure, how can so different a substance as mind perceive it? With most modern metaphysicians, the theory has taken a more spiritual form. Some make the idea an affection of the brain. Most of its supporters do not know what to make of it. With the more sensible, the idea is merely the mind apprehending the object. But in this case, the idea is not the object looked at, but the mind looking at it. Locke speaks everywhere of the mind perceiving the idea rather than the thing, and has thus confused his realistic philosophy and made knowledge consist in the discovery of the conformity of our ideas to one another, and not their conformity to things. And so the question was raised, and has been much discussed, by Thomas Reid, Sir William Hamilton, and the Scottish School of Philosophy, as to whether it is necessary to suppose that there is anything coming between the perceiving mind and the thing perceived. To allege that there is such a middle agent is at best a hypothesis of which there can be no positive proof. As a hypothesis, it explains nothing, but rather perplexes everything by bringing in agents of the existence of which we have no proof, and which, if they did exist, would demand new explanations. For we have now to account not for the action of body on mind, but for the action first of body on this idea, and then the action of this idea on the mind. The simplest, the most satisfactory account is that body acts on mind, and that we perceive the very thing. The inferential theory. According to it, the knowledge of objects external and extended is got by inference from something else, from a sensation or from an indefinable thing called an impression. Some regard the argument as legitimate and believe in the existence of body. Some look upon it as illegitimate and so hold that there is no proof of the existence of matter. Certain metaphysicians of the French sensational school, such as Destutt de Tracy and Dr. Thomas Brown of Edinburgh, held that from a sensation in the mind we argue the existence of an external world, and justified the inference. According to this theory, there is first a sensation and then an inference that there is an external object, the cause of it. For example, the child notices what it afterwards learns to characterize as the face of its mother. It finds that it cannot reproduce this at pleasure, and that there is nothing within itself to produce it, and it concludes that there must be something external acting as its cause. It is supposed that an accumulation of such experiences gives us the idea which we have of matter. Now, there are manifestly many assumptions in this supposed process. First, it is assumed that everything beginning to be must have a cause. Brown regarded this principle as intuitive, and so is entitled to use the principle. It might be difficult, however, to prove that if a child were shut up within its own self, it could, at an early date, or at all, arrive at a belief in invariable causation merely from experience, for its experience would habitually be of events without a known cause. But granting that it could, the difficulty arises. How could the mind think or imagine anything external of which it has no experience, till, as is supposed, it has drawn the inference? But a more formidable, I believe an insuperable objection remains. It is certain that in our natural idea of, or belief in, an external world, we regard it as extended. But how have we got this idea? From the experience of a sensation which is without extension, we are not entitled to argue the existence of an extended object, as we would have something in the conclusion, namely extension, not in the premises. The reasoning being thus illegitimate, we are driven to one or other of two conclusions. One, by far the most reasonable, that we perceive extended objects at once and intuitively. The other is that matter is and must be forever unknown to us, the conclusion drawn from Brown's view by J.S. Mill and his school, which sets aside our intuitive convictions. The phenomenal and relative theories. Reference has already been made to these. The former is a Kantian modification of Hume's doctrine that all the mind perceives through the supposed senses are impressions. Kant saw at once that these impressions were not knowledge and could not give knowledge. Not wishing to assume anything not allowed him by the skeptic, he took the position, let us assume that there is nothing but appearances and agree to call the things thus primarily before us presentations without asserting what they are. And then he proceeded by a series of subjective forms to fashion them into a grand intellectual system. But as he had not objective reality in what he started from, he never could reach it by any formal process of thought. So his philosophy commenced with appearances and culminated with subjective forms. I meet this theory from the beginning by insisting that appearances must be appearances of something, are in fact things appearing, and that in our first mental operations we know things presenting themselves. According to the other and allied theory, we know merely relations. True, we are able to discover relations, but they are relations between things so far known. Our knowledge of relations is of things real or imaginary as related. We have as clear evidence that we know things as that we know the relations of things. Natural realism, or immediate perception. According to it, we perceive the external object directly. That object may be in our frame or in a body affecting our frame. Upon our primitive knowledge, we may build other knowledge by further experience and by legitimate inferences. But all our experiences throw us back on an immediate knowledge of matter. All our reasonings about body imply a primitive cognition on which they proceed. It must be left an unsettled question, in regard to which we may have to seek and obtain further and further light. What is the precise object we perceive by the senses generally, and by each of the senses? Before the time of Berkeley, it was generally believed that we at once know distance by the eye. Since his time, it has commonly been acknowledged that in this knowledge there are gathered observations and reasoning involved. But these acquired perceptions imply primary ones on which they proceed. It is by such facts, which we know at once, as the size and brightness of the object and the intervening objects all seen, that we determine distance by the eye. Later physiological and psychological research seem to be showing that in the exercise of the senses there are organic processes and mental processes deeper down than those which appear on the surface. But whatever intermediary steps there be, there must be beyond and beneath them, and this to start with, a knowledge of body occupying space. Yet in order to uphold this doctrine, certain distinctions must be drawn. Section 3. Distinctions to be attended to in holding the doctrine of natural realism. Extra-mental and extra-organic knowledge, sensation and perception, original and acquired perceptions. Extra-mental and extra-organic. All knowledge obtained through the senses is discerned as extra-mental, that is, as out of and beyond the perceiving mind. Our perception of the organs of the body, say the tongue or the eye, is of something not in the self cognizing it, but we come to know objects outside our perceived organs and affecting them. It is thus that on stretching out our hand or foot, we find something, a stone or board, resisting. This knowledge may be called extra-organic. All our cognitions through the senses are extra-mental. Those through some of the senses, such as the sight and the muscular sense, are also extra-organic. That is, they look at objects beyond our bodily frame. End of section 3.